The whisper of the rogue's offer slithered into the hollow space where her heart used to be. "I can make the pain stop," he had said, his eyes like chips of obsidian in the moonlight. "I can sever the bond. He will be nothing but a memory." For a price, of course. There was always a price, but as she stood on the precipice of oblivion, every fibre of her being screaming for release from the phantom touch of the Alpha who had shattered her, one question held her back. The bond was killing her, but what if the cure, the forgetting, was even worse? What if the only thing more painful than remembering him was a world where she couldn't? The air in the clearing thrummed with a nervous electric energy. Moonlight filtered through the dense canopy of the great oaks, dappled the forest floor in shifting patterns of silver and black. It was the night of the Grand Conclave, the one night every 5 years when the packs of the Northern Ridge gathered in a tense but sacred truce. For most, it was a time for politics, for reaffirming treaties and settling disputes. But for the unmated wolves, it was a night of breathless possibility. It was a night for mates. Lyra stood at the edge of the throng, her senses overwhelmed. The mingled scents of hundreds of werewolves, each one unique, filled the air. A complex tapestry of pine, earth, snow, and power. Her own wolf, a restless, optimistic creature, paced within her, every nerve ending alive with anticipation. At 20, Lyra was old enough to have felt the pangs of loneliness, to have watched her friends find their other halves, and settle into the placid contentment of a completed bond. Tonight, she hoped, would be her turn. Her best friend, Ben, stood beside her, a solid, comforting presence. His own mating 2 years prior had done little to dull his protective instincts towards her. "Just breathe, Lyra," he murmured, noticing the way her hands were clenched into fists at her sides. "Don't let your wolf get carried away. If he's here, you'll know. You can't force it." "I know," she whispered back, though her heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. It was easy for him to say. His bond with his mate, Clara, was a placid, gentle thing, a quiet hum of affection that everyone in their Blue Moon pack envied. Lyra secretly yearned for something more. She dreamt of a lightning strike, a soul-shaking connection that would set her world on fire. The clearing fell silent as the Alphas took their places on a raised dais of ancient stone. One by one, they stepped forward, their presence radiating an authority that demanded respect. Then the final Alpha appeared, and the very air seemed to crackle and shift. He was the last to arrive, the Alpha of the formidable Stonecrest pack, a man whose name was spoken in whispers of both fear and reverence. Alpha Jaxon. He was nothing like the aging, grizzled Alphas who stood beside him. He was young, perhaps only a few years older than Lyra herself, with a lean, powerful build that spoke of barely restrained energy. His hair was the colour of midnight, and his eyes, even from across the clearing, seemed to burn with a cold silver fire. Power rolled off him in palpable waves, an untamed feral force that silenced the chatter and drew every eye. He was magnificent. And the moment his gaze swept over the crowd, a jolt, white-hot and fierce, shot through Lyra. It was more than a lightning strike. It was the universe itself, tearing open. Mate. The word was a primal scream from her wolf, a cry of pure, unadulterated ecstasy. The world narrowed to a single point, him. The cacophony of scents in the clearing vanished, replaced by one singular, intoxicating aroma that was his alone, a scent of winter storms and ancient forests, of power and pine. A shimmering, invisible cord seemed to snap into place between them, pulling her soul towards his. It was a feeling of coming home, of a fractured piece of herself, finally, miraculously, clicking into place. She could feel his power, his authority, his deep-seated loneliness, all of it flooding her senses through the nascent bond. Tears of joy pricked her eyes. She saw his head snap up, his silver eyes locking directly onto hers across the crowded space. She saw the flicker of shock, of recognition. He felt it too. He had to. This was real. This was fate. This was everything she had ever dreamed of. For a heartbeat, the world stood still. Then, his expression changed. The shock was replaced by something cold, something hard and impenetrable as granite. His lips, which she was suddenly certain would feel like fire against her own, thinned into a harsh line. And then he spoke, not with his voice, but through the brand-new bond that connected their very souls, a channel that should have been used for words of love and acceptance. No, the word was not a whisper. It was a psychic blow, a brutal, serrated blade that severed something deep within her. It was followed by a wave of pure, undiluted rejection, a force so cold and absolute it felt like being plunged into a frozen lake. He pushed her away, not physically, but with the full force of his formidable alpha will, slamming a metaphysical door in the face of her joyous, hopeful wolf. I, Alpha Jaxon of the Stonecrest Pack, reject you. The words echoed in the sudden, silent void where their connection had been. The pain was immediate and catastrophic. It was a physical agony, a sensation of being torn in half, from the inside out. A scream ripped from her throat, raw and broken. The shimmering cord between them didn't just break, it shattered, leaving a gaping, bleeding wound on her soul. Her knees buckled, and the world dissolved into a swirling vortex of pain and confusion. The last thing she saw before darkness consumed her was his face, his expression, a mask of cold, unyielding indifference as he turned away from her, leaving her broken on the forest floor. The journey back to the Blue Moon territory was a blur of whispered condolences and pitying glances. Ben had carried her from the clearing, his own face a mask of furious disbelief. The physical agony of the rejection had subsided into a dull, throbbing ache that settled deep in her bones, but the wound on her soul remained, a festering, gaping chasm of loss. The rejection should have severed the bond completely. It was a brutal but clean process, a spiritual amputation that, while painful, allowed both parties to heal and move on. But something had gone wrong. As they crossed the border into their own lands, she felt it, a faint, ghostly tug, a phantom sensation, like a limb that had been cut off, but could still feel an itch. It was him. It was the ghost of their bond, a frayed, broken thread that refused to be completely severed. Her wolf, which should have retreated, wounded and cowed, was instead a ball of frantic, confused energy, pacing the cage of her ribs, whining and scratching at the invisible wall he had erected between them. "He is still there," the wolf whispered, a constant, maddening refrain in the back of her mind. "Our mate is still there." Days turned into a week, and Lyra began to unravel. The phantom thread of the bond grew stronger, not weaker. It was a one-way connection. She could feel him, but he, it seemed, could feel nothing of her. She felt echoes of his emotions, a flash of anger when he dealt with a pack dispute, a wave of deep, weary loneliness late at night that was so profound it stole her breath. And always, she was drowning in his scent. It clung to her clothes, to her bedsheets, to the very air in her small cabin. The scent of winter storms and pine was no longer a promise of homecoming. It was the smell of her own personal hell. She couldn't eat. Food tasted like ash in her mouth. Sleep offered no escape, her dreams filled with visions of silver eyes and a voice that rejected her over and over again. She grew thin, the healthy glow in her cheeks replaced by a pallid, greyish tint. Dark circles bloomed beneath her eyes, which had lost their vibrant hazel light. The world seemed to have been bled of its colour, everything muted and dull. The pack treated her with a gentle, suffocating kindness. Clara brought her broth she couldn't swallow, and herbal teas that did nothing to soothe the ache in her soul. Then checked on her constantly, his face etched with a helpless frustration. He had gone to their Alpha, a wise old wolf named Alistair, demanding to know why Jaxon's rejection had been so flawed, so cruel. Alistair had come to see her himself, his ancient eyes full of a sad wisdom. "A rejection is an act of will, Lyra," he had explained, his voice a gravelly rumble. "The bond is a sacred, living thing. To sever it, both parties, or at least the rejecting party, must be absolute in their intent. Jaxon's rejection was incomplete. It was powerful enough to shatter the connection, but not to erase it entirely. I have never seen its like. It is as if he built a dam but failed to stop all the cracks. A small part of the bond remains, poisoning you. Poison. It was the perfect word. It was a slow-acting venom, seeping into every part of her, breaking her down, cell by cell. Her wolf was no help. It refused to let go, convinced that this was all a terrible mistake. It howled for its mate, a constant, silent scream in her skull that left her weak and trembling. "He needs us," it would cry. "He is lonely. He is in pain. He's the one who did this to us." Myra would snarl back in the privacy of her own mind, but her anger was a feeble thing against the raw, instinctual power of her wolf's grief. Her breaking point came 2 weeks after the conclave. She was walking by the river that bordered their territory, the one place she could go where the scent of running water seemed to dilute the ever-present scent of him. She was staring at her reflection, at the hollowed-out stranger who stared back, when she felt a sudden, sharp spike of pain through the bond. It was his pain, so intense and overwhelming, it brought her to her knees. It was a feeling of being cornered, of a desperate, losing battle. And then, as quickly as it came, it was gone, leaving her gasping and shaking on the riverbank. She couldn't live like this anymore. She was a ghost haunting her own life, tethered to a man who didn't want her, a man whose own life, it seemed, was filled with a pain she was forced to share. Death felt like a welcome release. As she knelt there, tears tracking paths through the dirt on her pale cheeks, a shadow fell over her. The bond sickness. It's eating you alive. The voice was smooth, a low melodic baritone that was utterly unfamiliar. Lyra looked up slowly. A man stood before her, leaning against a tree. He was tall and lean, dressed in the dark, practical leathers of a rogue. His hair was the colour of pale wheat, and his eyes were a startling, intelligent shade of green. He carried himself with a relaxed, confident grace that was at odds with his status as an outcast. Rogues were usually broken, half-mad things. But this one was different. He was watching her not with pity, but with a sharp, analytical curiosity. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice a hoarse whisper. "My name is Kale," he said, pushing himself off the tree and taking a step closer. He moved with a predator's silence. "And I know what you're going through. More importantly," he paused, his green eyes boring into hers, "I know how to fix it." Lyra stared at him, her heart giving a hopeful, painful flutter. "Fix it? No one can fix it. The bond is broken." "No," Kale corrected her gently. "It isn't. That's the problem. It's frayed, not severed. A botched rejection from an alpha who, for whatever reason, didn't have the conviction to see it through. He left a sliver of the connection intact, enough to let you feel him, enough to let your wolf pine itself to death, but not enough for him to feel you. It's the cruelest cut of all." He understood. The relief of being so perfectly understood was a balm on her raw nerves. "How do you know this?" A flicker of something, a shadow of an old pain, crossed his face. "Let's just say I have some personal experience with the complexities of mating bonds." He knelt in front of her, his presence calm and reassuring. "I can help you, Lyra. I can do what your alpha couldn't. I can complete the rejection. I can sever that final thread, permanently." The words were a lifeline, a promise of sweet, blessed relief. To be free of the constant pain, the phantom scent, the echoes of his emotions. To be whole again. "How?" she breathed. "It requires a ritual," he said, his voice dropping lower. "An old magic. Pack wolves have forgotten these things, but we rogues, we have to hold on to every scrap of knowledge we can find to survive. It is not without its risks, and it requires a price." "A price?" "Of course. There was always a price." "What kind of price?" "The ritual requires a catalyst, an item of great personal significance to the one who rejected you, something he has imbued with his power, his essence, an alpha's personal blade, a ceremonial cloak, something of that nature," he explained. "And it requires payment for my services, of course." Lyra's hope faltered. How could she possibly get her hands on something so personal from an alpha who hated her, from a pack that was a rival to her own? "That's impossible." "Difficult, not impossible," Kale said with a confident smile. "You are a daughter of the Blue Moon Pack. You have resources. And you have a powerful motivation. The alternative is to let this sickness consume you until your wolf gives up and your spirit fades. You will be dead within a year." His words were blunt, brutal, but they rang with the horrifying chime of truth. She could feel it happening already, the slow, inexorable fading of her own life force. He was offering her the only way out. "Think about it," Kale said, standing up. "When you decide you want to live, find me. I am not hard to find, for those who are truly looking." He gave her a last, lingering look, his green eyes seeming to see right through to the desperate, dying creature within her. Then, as silently as he had appeared, he melted back into the forest, leaving Lyra alone with a terrible, impossible choice. The path to freedom lay through betraying her pack's truce and stealing from the very man who had broken her. But the alternative was to lie down and die, tethered to a ghost. The rogue's proposition churned in Lyra's mind, a venomous cure warring with a terminal disease. The thought of being free, truly free from the ghostly chains that bound her to Jaxon, was a heady, intoxicating lure. To wake up one morning and not have his scent clinging to her senses, to not feel the phantom ache in her soul, it was a fantasy she could barely dare to imagine. Yet the price felt impossibly high, not just the physical act of stealing from a rival Alpha, but the spiritual implications of what Kale proposed. Old magic. The words sent a shiver of unease down her spine. Pack lore was filled with cautionary tales about the dark rituals practiced by rogues, magic that twisted the natural order and always came at a hidden cost far greater than the one stated. To sever a mate bond, a sacred thing created by the moon goddess herself, felt like a blasphemy, a defiance that would surely have consequences. Her wolf, for the first time since the rejection, was in agreement with her hesitation. "Danger," it whispered, the word a low growl in her mind. The smiling one smells of shadows and deceit. He is not to be trusted. But what was the alternative? Lyra felt the constant, low-grade fever of the bond sickness burning under her skin. She was getting weaker. Her patrols along the pack borders, once a source of pride, were now an exhausting ordeal. She was slower, her senses dulled by the static of her pain. She was becoming a liability to her pack, a ghost haunting the edges of their vibrant life. The pity in their eyes was becoming harder to bear than outright scorn. She needed more information. She couldn't make a decision this monumental based on the words of a mysterious road and the desperate yearning for relief. She needed to understand why. Why had Jaxon rejected her so brutally, yet so incompletely? There was no precedent for it. Alphas were decisive, their actions absolute. A botched rejection from an alpha of his power made no sense. It was a puzzle, and a small, stubborn part of her, the part that wasn't consumed by agony, needed to solve it. Her first stop was the pack archives, a dusty, scroll-filled chamber beneath the Alpha's main lodge, presided over by Elias, an ancient wolf whose memory served as the pack's living history. Elias was nearly blind, his eyes clouded over with the mists of age, but his mind was as sharp as a freshly honed claw. "The Stonecrest pack," Elias rasped, his bony fingers tracing the spine of a massive leather-bound tome. A proud line, a powerful line, but a cursed one. Lyra's breath caught in her throat. "Cursed? What do you mean?" Elias sighed, a sound like dry leaves skittering across stone. "It is a story a century old. The first alpha of their line, Jaxon's great-great-grandfather, made a pact with a fey creature to win a devastating border war. He gained immense power, the strength to crush his enemies and secure his territory. But the Fae, as they are wont to do, built a hook into their gift. The pact granted power to the Alpha's bloodline, but it tainted the mate bond. It became possessive, corrupting. He pulled out a fragile yellowed scroll. It is said that any mate accepted by a Stonecrest Alpha becomes an anchor for the Fey creature's dark magic. The bond, meant to be a source of strength and love, instead becomes a conduit. The mate is slowly drained of their life force, their will, their very essence, feeding the Alpha's power until they are nothing but an empty shell. Jaxon's grandfather's mate went mad and threw herself from the highest cliff on their territory. His own father's mate, she just faded away, dying in her sleep before her 30th birthday. Lyra felt a chill sweep over her that had nothing to do with the damp air of the archives. She thought of Jaxon's face at the conclave, the flash of pure, unadulterated shock in his eyes when he'd first recognized her. It wasn't just the shock of finding his mate. It was horror. His father, before he died, made Jaxon swear an oath, Elias continued, his voice low, that he would never take a mate, that he would rule alone and let the Alpha bloodline, and the curse, die with him. To accept a mate would be to condemn her to a fate worse than death. The pieces crashed into place in Lyra's mind, forming a picture of such profound tragedy that it stole her breath. Jaxon's rejection wasn't an act of cruelty. It was an act of sacrifice. He had looked at her, his fated mate, the other half of his soul, and had chosen to shatter them both, rather than subject her to the horror of his family's curse. The coldness, the indifference, it had all been a mask, a desperate attempt to make the rejection absolute. But it had failed. It had failed because, despite his oath, despite the terrible choice he was making, some part of him, some deep, instinctual part of his own wolf, could not fully let her go. That was why the bond had not been cleanly severed. His will was at war with his own soul. The agony she had been feeling shifted, transformed by this new, devastating context. The pain was still there, but now it was layered with a deep, aching empathy. The echoes of his loneliness she felt through the bond were not just the solitude of an alpha, but the profound isolation of a man who was doomed to be alone forever. The flashes of his pain were the torment of a man at war with his own heart. This changed everything. Kale had offered her a way out, a way to save herself. But the knowledge of Jaxon's sacrifice ignited a spark of defiance in her. The curse was the enemy, not Jaxon. It had taken her mate from her, and it was slowly killing her with the fallout. To simply run, to sever the bond and leave him to his fate, felt like a coward's choice. It felt like letting the curse win. Her resolve hardened. She would not be a victim. She would not let this ancient evil destroy 2 more lives. She didn't know how, but she was going to fight back. And to do that, she had to get closer to the source of the problem. She had to go to Stonecrest. The decision was pure madness, a flagrant violation of pack law. To cross into another pack's territory without permission was a crime punishable by death. But Lyra was already dying, and the slow, agonizing fade of the bond sickness was a far worse fate than a quick, clean end. Ben, of course, was furious when she told him. "You can't be serious, Lyra. You'll be torn to shreds before you get within a mile of their main lodge. Jaxon will kill you himself." "He won't," she said, a certainty in her voice that surprised even her. "He can't. The bond, as broken as it is, still protects me from him. He can't bring himself to cause me direct, fatal harm. It's the only reason I'm still alive." It was a wild guess, a leap of faith based on the new understanding of his inner conflict, but she believed it. She didn't tell him about the curse. It was not her secret to share, and it would only put him in more danger. She simply said she needed to understand, to confront Jaxon herself. Seeing he couldn't dissuade her, Ben did the only thing he could. He helped her. He procured maps of the Stonecrest territory, marking the patrol routes and blind spots. He gave her a pack filled with supplies and a dark cloak to help her blend in with the shadows. "Be smart, Lyra," he pleaded, as he hugged her goodbye at the edge of their territory. "Don't let your wolf lead you. Use your head." As Lyra slipped across the border under the light of a half-moon, the world changed. The air grew colder, the scent of the earth sharper. The very trees seemed to stand taller, their branches like a cage against the night sky. This was Stonecrest land, and it felt like the domain of a wounded king. The power she sensed here was immense, but it was tinged with a deep, pervasive sadness. For 2 days, she moved like a ghost through the dense forest, using every ounce of skill she possessed to remain unseen. The proximity to Jaxon was a constant, agonizing pull. The bond hummed with a low, painful energy, a siren song luring her towards the heart of the territory. On the 3rd night, she finally saw it, the Stonecrest Lodge, a formidable structure of dark timber and riverstone built into the side of a mountain overlooking a valley. She found a vantage point on a rocky outcrop, concealed by overgrown bushes, and she watched. She saw the life of the pack, the warriors training, the pups playing, the everyday bustle. It was a strong pack, a loyal pack, and, at its centre, was Jaxon. She saw him directing the patrols, his voice calm and authoritative. She saw him sparring with his beta, his movements a blur of controlled, lethal grace. And she saw him, in the quiet moments, when he stood alone on the balcony of the lodge, staring out at the moon, his shoulders slumped, the mask of the indifferent Alpha gone, replaced by a look of such profound, crushing loneliness, but it made her own soul ache in sympathy. Her wolf, agitated and hopeful, whined within her. "Mate is here. Go to him. Heal him." But Lyra knew it wasn't that simple. She couldn't just walk in there. She needed a plan. She needed a way to get close, to learn more about the curse, to find a weakness. Her gaze fell upon the bustling kitchens, the servants and workers moving in and out, their faces anonymous. An idea, desperate and dangerous, began to form. They would be looking for a powerful warrior, a rogue wolf challenging their borders. They would never look for a broken, half-faded she-wolf looking for work as a scullery maid. It was a reckless, suicidal plan. But as she watched Jaxon standing alone under the cold moonlight, she knew she had to try. She had to get inside those walls. The rogue had offered her an escape, but her heart, her stubborn, defiant heart, was no longer interested in running away. It was interested in fighting back. Lyra spent another day observing the routines of the Stonecrest Lodge, her mind racing. The plan was fraught with peril. Every step a potential misstep that could lead to her discovery and death. She had to suppress her own scent, a difficult task for any wolf, and adopt the meek, submissive posture of an omega, a low-ranking worker, to avoid drawing any untoward attention. She used mud and crushed herbs to mask her blue moon pack scent, replacing it with the neutral smell of earth and vegetation. She practiced hunching her shoulders, keeping her eyes downcast, making herself as small and unnoticeable as possible. It was a demeaning charade, an insult to her training as a warrior, but it was necessary. She approached the lodge from the trade entrance at the back, where suppliers delivered goods to the kitchens. It was a chaotic hub of activity, the perfect place to slip in unnoticed. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she joined a group of locals delivering sacks of flour, her head bowed, her dark cloak pulled tight around her thin frame. No one gave her a second glance. She was just another shadow in a busy morning. Once inside the kitchen, the heat, noise, and smells were overwhelming. A large, formidable she-wolf, with arms as thick as tree branches, ruled the domain, shouting orders and brandishing a ladle like a scepter. This was Martha, the head cook. Lyra approached her cautiously, her voice soft and timid. "Excuse me, ma'am," she murmured. "I was told you might have need of an extra pair of hands. I'm a hard worker." Martha eyed her skeptically, her gaze lingering on Lyra's thinness. "You look like a stiff breeze could knock you over. We do hard work here, girl. No room for layabouts." "I'm stronger than I look," Lyra insisted, forcing a desperate edge into her voice. "I've nowhere else to go. I'll do any work you ask." Perhaps it was the genuine desperation she projected, or perhaps the kitchens were truly short-staffed, but after a long, scrutinizing moment, Martha grunted. "Fine, we'll try you for a day. You'll wash pots." The last boy quit, said his hands got too soft. "Don't expect any special treatment." And just like that, Lyra was in. She was assigned to a dark, steamy corner of the kitchen, a mountain of greasy, soot-blackened pots her new domain. The work was grueling, her hands quickly becoming raw and chapped from the harsh soap and scalding water. But she welcomed the physical pain. It was a distraction from the constant, soul-deep ache of the bond. Being this close to Jaxon was a unique form of torture. The bond was a live wire inside her, humming with a painful, vibrant intensity. Every time he was near, the pull was so strong she felt she might physically be dragged towards him. His scent was everywhere, thick and intoxicating, weaving itself into the steam and smoke of the kitchens. She had to fight with every ounce of her will to keep her wolf from howling his name, to keep her own legs from carrying her out of the kitchens and into his presence. She learned to track his movements by the subtle shifts in the bond's intensity. She knew when he was in his office above the Great Hall, when he was in the training grounds out back, when he was walking the corridors of his home. She felt flashes of his frustration as he dealt with a border dispute, his pride as he watched the young wolves train, and always, in the quiet moments, that profound, crushing loneliness that echoed her own. For weeks, she toiled in obscurity, her disguise holding firm. She became a fixture in the kitchens, the quiet, hard-working girl who never spoke unless spoken to. She listened more than she talked, gleaning scraps of information from the idle gossip of the kitchen staff. They spoke of their Alpha with a fierce loyalty and a deep sadness. They knew he was cursed to be alone, though few knew the true, horrific details. They saw his solitude as a noble sacrifice, and they loved him for it. Her opportunity to learn more came from an unexpected source. An elderly wolf named Samuel, who was in charge of mending tools and sharpening knives for the pack, took a liking to her. He would often sit near her station to eat his lunch, sharing stories and observations. He had served the pack for 60 years and had seen the curse play out with his own eyes. One afternoon, as she was scrubbing a particularly stubborn pot, Samuel spoke, his voice low. "You have a sad wolf, child." Lyra froze, her heart leaping into her throat. I don't know what you mean." Samuel gave her a kind, knowing smile. "I may be old, but I am not blind or deaf. I hear the way your breath catches when the Alpha walks by. I see the pain in your eyes that you try so hard to hide. You carry the scent of a broken bond." Tears pricked Lyra's eyes. It was a relief to have someone see past her disguise, to acknowledge the truth of her suffering. She could only nod, unable to speak. "It was him, wasn't it?" Samuel continued gently. "At the conclave." Lyra finally looked at him, her defences crumbling. "How did you know?" "I was there when his father found his mate," Samuel said, his eyes distant with memory. "I saw the same look of joy, followed by the same look of absolute horror, on his face, and I saw what the bond did to that poor girl. She was vibrant, full of life. Within a year, she was a ghost. You have that same look about you, the look of a fading light." He sighed heavily. "Our Alpha carries a heavy burden. He did what he did to spare you that fate." "I know about the curse," Lyra whispered. Samuel's eyes widened in surprise. "Very few do." "I need to find a way to break it," Lyra said, her voice filled with a new, fierce determination. "There has to be a way. Curses, pacts, they all have loopholes, weaknesses." Samuel studied her for a long moment, then seemed to come to a decision. The fey creature that cursed his line, it is bound to an object, a focus for its power. It is hidden somewhere within this lodge. It is the heart of the curse. To destroy it is to break the pact. He leaned closer, his voice barely a whisper. "It is said the object is tied to the Alpha's own life force. He has tried to find it himself, but the magic that conceals it is powerful. It clouds the mind of any with Stonecrest blood. He cannot sense it, but you are." He looked at her pointedly. "You are not of Stonecrest, but through the bond you share a connection to him. You might be the only one who can sense it." The old wolf's words were a revelation. He had given her a path, a tangible goal. Find the anchor, destroy the curse. It was a desperate hope, but it was the first real hope she had felt in months. The search was a dangerous, nerve-wracking affair. Lyra had to move through the lodge at night, a ghost, in the halls of her enemy, her mate. She used her hours off to explore, to slip into rooms and corridors where she didn't belong. The bond acted as her guide. She would focus on the curse, on the feeling of old, dark magic, and follow the faint resonance she could feel through her connection to Jaxon. The lodge was a labyrinth, filled with generations of history, of trophies, of memories. She searched the library, the armory, the great hall. The pull of the curse was everywhere, a faint, miasmic hum, but she couldn't pinpoint its source. It was like trying to find a single note in a symphony of echoes. One night, her search led her to the Alpha's private wing. This was the most dangerous place of all. Her heart pounded as she slipped past the sleeping guards, her every sense on high alert. The bond thrummed violently here, the proximity to Jaxon almost unbearable. His scent was so thick she could taste it, a heady mix of pine and winter air that made her wolf whine with longing. She found herself outside his study. The door was unlocked. Taking a deep breath, she pushed it open and slipped inside. The room was dark, lit only by the moonlight streaming through a large window. It was a stark, masculine space, dominated by a massive oak desk and shelves filled with maps and scrolls. But what drew her eye was a large, ornate chest made of dark, unfamiliar wood, bound with iron straps, sitting in the corner of the room. As she moved towards it, the hum of the curse grew stronger, more focused. This was it. The source was inside this chest. She could feel the corrupt magic radiating from it, a cold, cloying presence that made the hair on her arms stand up. She reached out a trembling hand to touch the lid, and as her fingers brushed the cold iron, a jolt of black energy shot up her arm. The room spun, and a vision flooded her mind. She saw a twisted, thorny forest under a blood-red moon. She saw the Fey creature, a being of shadows and thorns, with eyes like burning coals. And she saw the pact being made, the exchange of power for a promise of eternal, soul-sucking torment. A gasp escaped her lips, and she stumbled back. "You should not be here." The voice was a low, dangerous growl, and it came from right behind her. Lyra's blood ran cold. She spun around to see Jaxon standing in the doorway, his massive frame blocking the only exit. His silver eyes, glowing in the darkness, were fixed on her, and they held no trace of the loneliness she had seen before. They held only the cold, lethal fury of an alpha whose most private sanctum had been breached. He didn't recognize her. All he saw was an intruder, an enemy, and in his eyes she saw her own death. The world narrowed to the space between them, thick with a silence that was more terrifying than any shout. Jaxon moved into the room with a fluid, lethal grace, his eyes never leaving her. The fury radiating from him was a physical force, pressing down on her, making it hard to breathe. Her every instinct screamed at her to drop to the floor, to expose her throat in the ultimate gesture of submission. It was the only thing that could save her from an enraged alpha. But the stubborn spark of defiance that had brought her this far refused to be extinguished. She would not die grovelling on the floor like a frightened omega. She was a warrior of the Blue Moon Pack, and she was the other half of his soul, whether he wanted her or not. She straightened her back, lifting her chin to meet his glacial stare. "Who are you?" he snarled, his voice a low growl that vibrated through the floorboards. "How did you get past my guards?" "They were asleep," Lyra said, her own voice surprisingly steady, though her heart felt like a trapped bird beating against her ribs. And your locks are old. A flicker of surprise crossed his face. No one spoke to him with such insolence. He took another step, closing the distance between them, until he was only an arm's length away. The sheer force of his presence was overwhelming. His scent, pine and winter storms, flooded her, and the bond, raw and agitated, screamed between them. She could feel his rage, but beneath it, she could also feel his shock, his confusion. The bond was a two-way street, however faint on his end. He had to feel something. You have one chance to tell me why I shouldn't rip your throat out for being in my private study, he said, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. Lyra held his gaze. Because you have tried to kill me once already, and it didn't work. The statement hung in the air, nonsensical to him, but deeply, painfully true to her. She saw the confusion in his silver eyes deepen. He didn't recognize her. The dirt, the baggy servant's clothes, the exhaustion etched on her features, they had rendered her a stranger. She was just a scrawny intruder who spoke in riddles. I have never seen you before in my life, he said, his brow furrowing. He was trying to place her scent, but she had masked it so well with the grime and herbs. Haven't you? She pushed, taking a desperate gamble. She focused on the bond, on the memory of the conclave, on the feeling of his soul crashing into hers. She pushed a memory towards him through their broken connection. Think back. Alpha. Moonlight. A clearing full of wolves. A girl with hazel eyes who looked at you and saw her entire world. His eyes widened. The blood drained from his face, leaving his tanned skin a sickly grey. The recognition, when it finally hit, was like a physical blow. He stumbled back a step, his breath catching in a choked gasp. The fury in his eyes was extinguished, replaced by a storm of disbelief, horror, and a pain so profound it mirrored her own. Yell, he breathed, the word a ghost of a sound. He stared at her thin frame, her chapped hands, the dark circles under her eyes. He was seeing her, truly seeing her, for the first time since the rejection. And he was seeing what the rejection had done to her. Whoa, what are you doing here? How? I work in your kitchens, she said, her voice flat. I have for weeks. I'm the one who scrubs the pots. The confession seemed to wound him more than any blade could have. The idea of his fated mate, the other half of his soul, toiling in his own home as a servant, wasting away under his nose, was a fresh level of hell he had clearly not anticipated. He looked at her, then at the ornate chest in the corner, and a grim understanding dawned on his face. The curse, he whispered. You know. I know, Lyra confirmed. I know you didn't reject me out of cruelty. You did it to save me. She took a step towards him, her own fear forgotten, replaced by a wave of empathy. But you failed, Jaxon. You didn't sever the bond. You just left it to fester. You left me tethered to your pain, and it is killing me. He flinched, as if she had struck him. He ran a hand through his dark hair, his composure, the iron control of the Alpha, completely shattered. He looked like a man on the rack, torn between his duty, his oath, and the heart-wrenching reality of the woman standing before him. I tried," he said, his voice ragged with a guilt that was terrifying to behold. "I pushed with all my will. I focused on the pain it would cause you, the life it would steal from you. I tried to make it absolute, but you couldn't," Lyra finished for him softly. "Because your wolf wouldn't let you. Some part of you refused to let me go completely. And that is the part that is going to help me fix this." She gestured towards the chest. "The phase anchor, the heart of the curse. It's in there, isn't it?" Jaxon stared at the chest, a look of weary frustration on his face. "Yes, my father searched for it. I have searched for it. We can feel its poison, but we cannot pinpoint it. The magic of the pact shields it from our bloodline. From our bloodline," Lyra said. "I'm not of your bloodline, but I am connected to you. I can feel it, Jaxon. I can feel the darkness coming from that chest. I think I'm the loophole." For a long moment he was silent, his mind clearly reeling from the impossible situation. The intruder he was about to kill was his mate. The dying girl he had tried to save had infiltrated his home and discovered the one secret he would kill to protect. And she was offering him the one thing he had given up on, a sliver of hope. His instinct, his training, everything he had ever known, screamed at him to throw her out, to send her as far away from him and his cursed pack as possible. But he couldn't. He looked at her, at the fierce, determined light that had replaced the faded look in her eyes, and he knew he couldn't. He had tried to save her by pushing her away. Perhaps the only true way to save her was to pull her closer. "The chest is sealed by the same magic," he said, his voice regaining a fraction of its command. It was not an agreement, but it was not a refusal either. It was the first step in a negotiation. "It cannot be opened by force. Every lock has a key," Lyra countered. "We will find it. Together." The word hung in the air between them. Together. It was a promise of partnership, a concept so foreign and forbidden to him that it was almost intoxicating. To share this burden, a burden he had carried in absolute solitude for his entire life, was a temptation beyond measure. Before he could respond, a new scent drifted into the room, a scent that didn't belong. It was the scent of dry leaves and subtle deceit. Lyra's wolf instantly bristled. Kale, the road, materialized in the shadows of the doorway, his confident smile firmly in place. "Well, this is a touching reunion," he said, his green eyes glinting with amusement. "But I'm afraid you're going about this all wrong." Jaxon immediately moved to stand in front of Lyra, his body a solid shield, a low growl rumbling in his chest. "Rogue, you are far from your own territory." "My territory is wherever I find myself," Kale replied easily, stepping into the moonlight. He looked past Jaxon, his gaze locking on Lyra. "I see you decided against my offer. A pity. It would have been so much cleaner, so much less complicated. What is he talking about?" Jaxon demanded, not taking his eyes off Kale. "He offered to sever the bond for me," Lyra explained, her voice low. "For a price?" "Ah, yes." "The price," Kale said, with a theatrical sigh. "You were supposed to bring me a personal item of the Alpha's. His ceremonial blade would have been perfect." He smiled, a cold, predatory expression. "But it was never about the object itself, my dear. It was about what the object could do in the ritual." He looked at Jaxon. You see, a forced severing of a mate bond creates a vacuum, a spiritual wound. With the right catalyst, that vacuum doesn't just dissipate. It can be used to pull, to siphon. I wouldn't have just freed her from the bond. I would have used that broken channel to drain a significant portion of your alpha power into myself. The confession was chilling. Kale wasn't a helper. He was a parasite, preying on the broken and desperate to increase his own strength. He had seen Lyra not as a person to be saved, but as a tool to be used against a powerful alpha. You would have been free, Lyra, Kale continued, trying to sow discord. And I would have been strong enough to challenge anyone. We both would have gotten what we wanted. You would have left her an empty shell. Just like the curse you claim to fight against, Jaxon snarled, his rage returning, now focused on a new, deserving target. Details, details. Kale waved a dismissive hand. The point is, you two, working together, trying to break a century-old Fae curse? It's foolish. The magic will consume you both. He looked at Lyra again, his voice dropping to a persuasive purr. It's not too late. Help me. We can still achieve our goals. Let him be consumed by his family's pathetic destiny. No, Myra said, her voice ringing with a conviction that felt forged in fire. She stepped out from behind Jaxon to stand beside him. It was a decoration. They were a united front. I am not your tool, and he is not my enemy. Kale's smile finally faded, replaced by a look of cold annoyance. So be it. You choose to die with him rather than live free. A foolish, sentimental choice. He took a step back, melting into the shadows. But know this. When you fail, when this curse begins to tear you both apart, I will be waiting, and my price will be much, much higher. And then he was gone, his scent lingering like a poisonous vapor in the air. The immediate threat had passed, but his words left a chilling echo. Lyra and Jaxon stood in the silent study, the moonlight illuminating with dust motes dancing between them. They were no longer just a cursed alpha and his rejected mate. They were partners in a desperate war against a formidable curse, with a cunning predator circling, waiting for them to bleed. The path ahead was dark and uncertain, but for the first time since the conclave, Lyra did not feel alone in her pain. She had found her mate, not in a joyous union, but in a shared, desperate battle for their very souls. The silence Kale left behind was heavy and profound. Myra and Jaxon stood in the moonlit study, the air still thick with the rogue's deceitful scent and the ancient coldness emanating from the Fae chest. The alliance between them was so new, so fragile. It felt like a flicker of candlelight in a hurricane. For weeks, she had been his secret torment, and he had been the source of her slow death. Now, they were partners. Jaxon was the first to break the silence, his voice low and rough, stripped of the Alpha's command and filled with a weary resignation. He was right about one thing. It is a foolish plan. Fighting for our lives is foolish? Lyra countered, her strength returning. Giving up seems far more foolish to me. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and she saw a flicker of admiration in his silver eyes. You are not what I expected, and you are not the monster I thought you were, she admitted softly. A fragile truce settled between them. The first order of business was the chest. Jaxon ran a hand over the dark, iron-bound wood, a grimace on his face. My father believed it could only be opened when the curse was at its weakest, during the winter's solstice. But he tried, and failed. The magic that seals it is formidable. It repelled him, nearly knocked the life from him. It reacted to me too, Lyra said, remembering the jolt of dark energy. But it didn't repel me with the same force. Maybe because I'm not of your bloodline. She looked from the chest to him, an idea forming. Maybe it requires both of us. The blood of the pact maker and the heart of the one the pact was designed to destroy. You and me, your blood, my will. It was a wild theory, but it was the only one they had. They agreed, for now, to keep her presence a secret. To the rest of the pack, she would remain the quiet scullery maid. At night she would meet him here, in his study, and they would work together to unravel the secrets of the curse and the chest that held its heart. Thus began a clandestine partnership, a strange double life for Lyra. By day she scrubbed pots, her head down, her presence meek. She endured the condescending glances of the higher-ranking pack members and the well-meaning but painful pity of old Samuel, who knew her secret but could not speak of it. By night, she would shed her lowly disguise and become the Alpha's co-conspirator, meeting him in the vast, silent library adjoining his study. The library was a treasure trove of Stonecrest history. Together, they pored over ancient scrolls and leather-bound journals, searching for any mention of the fey creature, any clue about the nature of the cursed object within the chest. Jaxon, who had only ever seen these archives as a painful reminder of his family's doom, began to see them through Lyra's determined eyes as a potential arsenal of knowledge. The work was grueling. The fey magic was insidious, casting a veil of confusion over the texts. Words would seem to shift on the page, and a deep, unnatural weariness would often overcome them, luring them towards sleep. It was during these moments that their strange broken bond became their greatest asset. Lyra, her senses sharpened by the connection, would often spot a passage that Jaxon's curse-clouded eyes would miss. When the magical weariness threatened to overwhelm her, Jaxon would instinctively move closer, his powerful presence a shield that seemed to beat back the encroaching darkness, even though the proximity clearly caused him a crack-in. Deep, stoic pain. In these long, quiet nights, surrounded by the ghosts of his ancestors, their walls began to crumble. He told her of his lonely childhood, of growing up with the knowledge that he could never have what every other wolf yearned for, a mate, a family. He spoke of the immense pressure of leading a pack while hiding such a fundamental weakness, the constant fear that his secret would be discovered and used against him. Lyra, in turn, described the agony of the one-sided bond, the slow fading of her own spirit, the despair that had driven her to his gates. She spoke of her own pack, her friends, the life she had been forced to leave behind. She did not accuse him. She simply stated the truth of her experience, and he listened, his face a mask of profound regret. "I never imagined it would be like this," he confessed one night, his voice barely a whisper. "I thought the rejection would be a clean break, a terrible, painful ending. But an ending nonetheless. To know that I have caused you this prolonged suffering, it is a greater torment than the curse itself." "We can't change what you did, Jaxon," she replied, her voice gentle. We can only change what we do now. The pull between them grew with every shared secret, every quiet moment of understanding. It was a constant, powerful current flowing beneath the surface of their partnership. Sometimes their hands would brush as they reached for the same scroll, and the contact would send a jolt of pure, unadulterated energy through them both, a reminder of the passionate, joyous bond that lay buried beneath the layers of pain and dark magic. They would pull back quickly, their faces flushed, a silent acknowledgement of the powerful what-if that hung in the air between them. Their research eventually led them to the journal of Jaxon's great-great-grandmother, the first mate to be taken by the curse. Her early entries were filled with love and joy, her words painting a portrait of a vibrant, happy she-wolf deeply in love with her alpha. But as the pages turned, the writing grew more erratic, the tone more desperate. She wrote of the strange lethargy, of nightmares filled with thorns and shadows. Her final entry, scrawled in a shaky, barely legible hand, provided the clue they had been searching for. "He gave me a gift," she had written. A heart, carved from the oldest wood of the whispering forest, bound in silver. A token of his unending love, but it feels so cold now. It feels like it is drinking my light. It lives in the chest he made for me, and I think it is drinking my soul. A wooden heart. The fey creature had twisted the Alpha's gift of love into the very anchor of its curse. They had found the nature of the object. Now they had to find a way to destroy it. As they drew closer to the truth, the curse began to fight back more aggressively. The whispers in the library grew louder, the illusions more vivid. One night, Lyra was caught in a powerful vision, seeing the kitchen she worked in consumed by flames, with Ben and Clara screaming her name from within the inferno. She cried out, the terror real, until Jaxon grabbed her shoulders, his voice cutting through the magical fog. "Lyra! It's not real! Look at me! Focus on me!" She looked into his silver eyes, anchoring herself to his presence, and the illusion shattered, leaving her trembling in his arms. At the same time, Kale began to make his move. He couldn't attack the pack directly, but he was a master of psychological warfare. A rumor began to circulate among the Stonecrest wolves, a whisper that started with the outer patrols and slowly crept its way into the lodge. A spy from Blue Moon was in their midst, a spy who was close to the Alpha. Suspicion, once planted, grew like a weed. Pack members began to look at each other with distrust. Jaxon's beta, a fiercely loyal but unsubtle wolf named Marcus, came to him, his face grim. "Alpha, the rumors are getting stronger. They say a she-wolf is influencing you, clouding your judgment. They speak of a spy." Jaxon, his face an unreadable mask, had to quell the unrest without revealing his secret. "My judgment is sound, Marcus. I am dealing with a threat to this pack that requires a delicate touch. Trust me, and ensure the loyalty of the warriors. Anyone spreading dissent will answer to me directly." His authority was absolute, but the seeds of doubt had been sown. Lyra could feel the suspicious glances of the other servants in the kitchen. The fragile anonymity she had built was beginning to crack. The danger was escalating on all fronts. They were in a race against the curse, against the rogue, and against the growing paranoia within the pack itself. Their final breakthrough came from one of Samuel's old stories. He told them of the Fey creature's one known weakness, a vulnerability to pure, unenchanted iron, forged not with magic, but with simple fire and sweat. And he spoke of a ritual of unmaking, which required the cursed object to be pierced by such an iron dagger, while the two souls bound by the pact willingly and fully embrace their bond, channeling their combined life force to shatter the external magic. The price of breaking the curse was to do the one thing they had both been fighting against. They had to drop the walls completely, open the bond, and let it flood them with all its pain and all its power. It was a terrifying prospect. The agony could kill them both. But it was their only chance. They found an old iron dagger in the armory, its surface pitted and plain. As the winter solstice approached, a night when the veil between worlds was thin and magic was at its most potent, they prepared themselves. The atmosphere in the lodge was tense, the pack on high alert from Kale's rumours, and the palpable sense of an impending confrontation. On the night of the solstice, a heavy, unnatural snow began to fall, blanketing the land in a silent, white shroud. Lyra and Jaxon met in the study. The time had come. "Are you ready?" Jaxon asked, his voice low. The iron dagger was in his hand. "No!" Lyra answered honestly, her heart pounding. "But I will be." Together, they approached the chest. They placed their hands on the lid, Lyra's small, chapped hand next to his large, powerful one. "Together," she whispered. "Together," he echoed. They closed their eyes and focused, not on the curse, but on each other. They reached out through the broken, painful tether of their bond, not with resistance, but with acceptance. For the first time, they didn't fight the pole. They leaned into it. A wave of pure, agonizing energy surged between them. Lyra cried out as the full force of Jaxon's century of inherited pain flooded her. Jaxon grunted, his knees buckling as he felt the raw, undiluted agony of her slow decay, the rejection, the loneliness. It was a storm of shared torment, a hurricane of the soul. But beneath the pain, there was something else. The pure, brilliant light of their fated connection, the glorious, soul-shaking hum of what they were meant to be. The Fey chest began to glow with a sickly green light. A high-pitched shriek echoed through the room as the iron lock, confronted with the pure, unified power of the bond it was designed to corrupt, began to smoke and melt. With a loud crack, the seal broke. Slowly, Jaxon lifted the heavy lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded black velvet, was a heart carved from gnarled black wood, bound in tarnished silver wire. It seemed to pulse with a malevolent light, and the cold in the room intensified, stealing the very air from their lungs. This was it, the heart of the curse. But as Jaxon reached for the iron dagger, the window to the study shattered inwards, spraying the room with glass and snow. Kale leaped into the room, his green eyes burning with a hungry, triumphant light. "I knew you could do it," he hissed, a cruel smile on his face. "Thank you for opening the box for me." He was no longer alone. Two other large, brutal-looking rogues stood behind him, their eyes glowing with a feral madness. The final confrontation had begun. The battle exploded in the confines of the study. There was no formal challenge, no circling, just the brutal, immediate violence of cornered wolves. Jaxon met Kale's charge with a roar that shook the very foundations of the lodge. The two males were a blur of motion, a whirlwind of black and pale gold as they crashed against furniture, their snarling and growling a visceral sound of pure fury. Kale was fast and cunning, his movements fueled by a desperate ambition, but Jaxon was driven by a century of his bloodline's suppressed rage and the primal, protective instinct for the mate he had finally, fully, claimed in his heart. Lyra had no time to watch them. The two other rogues, their eyes burning with a mindless, feral hunger, turned on her. They were larger than her, their muscles corded and thick from a life of brutal survival. They saw her as the weaker target, an easy kill before they helped their leader. It was a fatal miscalculation. They were expecting the timid scullery maid. They got the warrior of the Blue Moon pack. The instant the first rogue lunged, Lyra dropped low, sweeping his legs out from under him with a practiced, powerful kick. He hit the floor with a heavy thud, and she was already moving, sidestepping the second rogue's clumsy attack. The bond, now a clear, open channel between her and Jaxon, was a revelation. It was no longer a source of pain, but a tactical advantage beyond measure. She could feel Jackson's position without looking. She could sense his intent, the rhythm of his fight. It was like having a second set of eyes, a second mind, working in concert with her own. She felt a surge of his strength, his stamina, flowing into her through the bond, burning away the last vestiges of the bond sickness and replacing it with a vibrant, humming power. She danced around the rogue's attacks, her movements economical and precise. She was not as strong, so she had to be smarter. She used their momentum against them, redirecting a charge so that one of the rogues crashed into a bookshelf, bringing a cascade of heavy tomes down on his head. Meanwhile, the cursed heart pulsed on the velvet lining of the open chest and the levelant beacon in the chaotic room. It seemed to feed on the violence, the air growing colder, the shadows in the corners of the room seeming to deepen and writhe. A wave of despair washed out from it, a magical assault designed to cripple them with hopelessness. Lyra felt it tug at her mind, whispering that she was too weak, that she would fail, that Jaxon would be killed. But then she felt Jaxon through the bond, a surge of pure, unyielding defiance, and she pushed the despair away, his strength becoming her own. Jaxon was slowly gaining the upper hand. Kale was skilled, but his power was borrowed, a patchwork of stolen strength and dark promises. Jaxon's power was innate, a deep, ancestral river that had been dammed up for 100 years and was now, finally, released. He slammed Kale against a wall, the timber groaning in protest. "You prey on the broken," Jaxon snarled, his face inches from the rogues. "You are nothing but a scavenger." Kale, seeing he couldn't win a direct fight, laughed, a breathless, desperate sound. "You're right, Alpha," he gasped. "Why fight you when I can simply take the prize?" With a sudden burst of energy, he shoved Jaxon back and leaped away, not towards the door, but towards the open chest. His eyes were fixed on the pulsing wooden heart, his face alight with a terrible, greedy hunger. He was abandoning the fight, making a final, desperate grab for the power he craved. The second rogue Lyra was fighting saw his leader's move and made a renewed effort to stop her, to keep her from interfering. But Lyra saw Cale's intent through the corner of her eye, and she felt a surge of pure panic from Jaxon through the bond. There was no time. With a cry of frustration, Lyra ducked under the rogue's arm, ignoring the claw that raked across her back, a searing line of pain. She didn't try to fight him further. She simply moved, her entire focus narrowing on the chest, on Cale, and on the plain iron dagger that still lay beside it. She and Cale reached the chest at the same moment. He lunged for the wooden heart, his fingers just inches away. Lyra, instead, grabbed the hilt of the iron dagger. It was cold and solid in her hand, a simple, real thing in a room filled with deceit and dark magic. "It's mine!" Cale screamed, his face contorted in a mask of pure avarice. "You can have it," Lyra said, her voice ringing with a sudden, calm clarity. As his fingers brushed against the carved wood, she raised the dagger high. Jaxon, seeing her intent, let out a furious roar and charged, not at Cale, but to her side, to defend her, to lend her his strength. She felt his power, his will, his love surge into her through the bond, a tidal wave of pure energy. It guided her hand, it steadied her arm. She plunged the iron dagger downwards with all her might. The blade struck the center of the wooden heart with a sickening crunch. For a moment, there was absolute silence. The heart pulsed once, a violent, lurid green light, a deafening shriek, the sound of a century of pain and malice erupted from it. Then, with a crack that sounded like a thunderclap, the wooden heart exploded. It did not just break. It detonated. A shockwave of pure white energy erupted from the chest, a cleansing fire that had nothing to do with the Fae's dark magic. It was the release of the curse, the energy of 100 years of stolen life force and broken bonds returning to the universe. The wave slammed into Cale and his robes, throwing them back against the far wall like rag dolls. It washed over Lyra and Jaxon, not with force, but with a feeling of immense, profound relief, like a fever breaking. The agonizing, sharp edges of their bond dissolved instantly. The pain vanished, not fading, but evaporating in the blink of an eye. In its place, the pure, brilliant connection of their fated mating bloomed in its full glory. It was a warmth that spread from her heart through every vein, a feeling of absolute peace, of perfect, unassailable rightness. She could feel Jaxon's soul entwined with hers, no longer a source of pain, but a symphony of strength, love, and a relief so profound it mirrored her own. The unnatural cold in the room vanished, replaced by the crisp air of a normal winter's night. Outside, the heavy, magical snowstorm ceased, and the clouds parted, allowing the pure, clean light of the solstice moon to flood the ruined study. In the sudden, peaceful silence, the two conscious rogues scrambled to their feet, dragging their stunned leader with them. Cale stared at Jaxon and Lyra, his face a mixture of terror and disbelief. The power he had coveted was gone, obliterated. He was just a simple rogue again, and he had made an enemy of one of the most powerful alphas on the continent. Without a word, they scrambled out the shattered window and disappeared into the night. The study was a disaster of broken furniture and scattered books, but in the centre of the room, Lyra and Jaxon stood untouched, bathed in moonlight. They were both breathing heavily, their bodies bruised and battered, but their eyes were locked on each other. All the barriers, all the pain, all the years of solitary suffering were gone. Slowly, as if waking from a long and terrible dream, Jaxon took a step towards her. He reached out a trembling hand, not to her shoulder, but to her face, his thumb gently brushing away a smudge of dirt from her cheek. His touch was not the phantom sensation she had endured for weeks. It was real. It was warm, and it sent a shiver of pure, unadulterated joy through her. "Lyra," he whispered, his voice thick with emotions too deep for words. Gratitude, regret, love, hope, all of it was there in that one word, in his shining silver eyes. Tears welled in her own eyes, but for the first time in a long time, they were tears of happiness. She leaned into his touch, covering his hand with her own. The fit was perfect. The war was over. The curse was broken. The rogue was gone. They had faced death, despair, and the darkest of magic. They had walked through fire together, and had come out the other side, not just healed, but whole. For 100 years, the Alphas of Stonecrest had been cursed to be alone. But as Jaxon drew Lyra into his arms, holding his mate for the first true time, the ancient halls of the lodge bore witness to the beginning of a new song. It was a song of a bond reforged in sacrifice, a love that had refused to be denied, and a future that was, at long last, their own to write.